The rain fell on the city like a shroud of liquid glass, blurring the neon signs into watercolor streaks against the night. From his penthouse office, Alistair Volkov watched the storm. The city was his kingdom, a sprawling chessboard of concrete and steel, and he was its undisputed king. Yet, the victory felt hollow. He sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, a monument to his isolation. The room was silent except for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the panoramic window and the quiet hum of a server bank in the corner. His world was one of whispers, of secrets traded in the dark, of loyalty bought and sold like currency. Alistair was known in the underworld as the Ghost. He was a phantom, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. He had inherited his father's empire and made it colder, more efficient, and infinitely more powerful. He had stripped it of its chaotic sentimentality and rebuilt it on a foundation of pure logic. There was no room for emotion in his calculations. He turned from the window as his second-in-command, Dmitri, entered the room. Dmitri's face was a mask of deference, but Alistair saw the flicker of ambition in his eyes. It was a look he knew well. He had worn it himself once. "The shipment is secure," Dmitri reported, his voice low. "The council is pleased." Alistair gave a slight, dismissive nod. The council was always pleased when money flowed. They were old men, relics of his father's era, who mistook profit for strength. They did not understand the true nature of power. "And the problem with the wharf union?" Alistair asked, his voice a low monotone that carried an implicit threat. "Resolved," Dmitri said. "Mr. Petrov sends his apologies. And his resignation." Resolved. It was a clean, sterile word for a messy business. Alistair felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not remorse. It was simply another variable controlled, another equation solved. He dismissed Dmitri with a wave of his hand and turned back to the window, the loneliness of his position settling over him once more. He was surrounded by men who feared him, but not one who knew him. He was a king in an empty castle. Miles below, in the city's grimy underbelly, Alara Vance held her daughter's small hand. The flickering fluorescent lights of the bus station cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. Lily, only 6 years old, was shivering, her small face pale with exhaustion and fear. "Is he still coming, Mommy?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible above the hiss of a bus's air brakes. Alara squeezed her daughter's hand, forcing a smile she did not feel. "No, sweetie. We're safe now. We're going on an adventure." It was a lie. They were not safe. They were running. The man they were running from was Marcus Thorne, Lily's father, and the source of every shadow in their lives. He was a police officer, a man who wore a badge that gave him power, and he had used that power to turn their home into a prison. The last argument had been the worst. The shouting, the sound of breaking glass, the cold, hard look in his eyes. She had seen it before, but this time was different. This time, she saw it directed at Lily. That was the moment her fear had finally crystallized into action. She had packed a single bag while he was out, grabbed Lily, and fled into the rainy night with nothing but a handful of cash and a desperate prayer. A wave of nausea washed over her. She saw him everywhere, in the face of a passing stranger, in the silhouette of a man standing under a distant street lamp. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then she saw him for real. He was standing at the far end of the station, his uniform a dark blot against the grimy tiles. He was scanning the crowd, his gaze methodical and predatory. He hadn't seen them yet, but he would. Time slowed to a crawl. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. The next bus wasn't for another hour. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. She saw an exit leading to a dark, narrow alleyway between the station and an old brick warehouse. Without a second thought, she pulled Lily toward it. "Come on, baby. Quick." The alley was a chasm of darkness, smelling of damp concrete and refuse. Rain sluiced down the walls. Halfway down the alley, a car was parked, a long, black sedan that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was impossibly sleek and out of place in this forgotten corner of the city. Its engine was idling, a low, powerful thrum that was almost comforting. Marcus's voice echoed from the station entrance, calling her name. It was a sound that made her skin crawl. Desperation was a key that unlocked doors one would never otherwise consider. She looked at the car, then at the handle of the rear passenger door. She tried it. It clicked open. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her fear. She bundled Lily inside, onto the plush leather seat. "Shoo, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Be as quiet as a mouse. It's a game." She slid in after her daughter, pulling the heavy door shut. The click was deafening in the sudden, insulated silence. The car's interior was dark, smelling of rich leather and something else, something clean and masculine. Through the tinted window, she saw Marcus's silhouette pause at the mouth of the alley. He peered into the darkness, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would see them. He took a step forward, then hesitated, turning away as his phone rang. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, pulling Lily into a tight embrace. They were hidden. They were safe, if only for a moment. She had no idea whose car she was in, no idea what she would do when the driver returned. All she knew was that for now, the monster was outside, and she was inside. Alistair walked down the alley, the rain beating on the shoulders of his expensive coat. He had taken this route to avoid the notice of his driver, a necessary precaution in his line of work. He preferred to be the one in control, unseen, unheard. He opened the driver's side door and slid behind the wheel, the world outside muted by the thick, armored glass. He started to pull out of the alley, his mind already on the next move, the next strategy. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the extra weight in the back, or the faint scent of rain-soaked wool that didn't belong. It was the smallest sound that alerted him, a tiny, choked sob from the back seat. Alistair froze. His hand moved instinctively to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Every muscle in his body tensed. He was the ghost. No one got this close to him. No one. He checked the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. He saw a woman, her face pale and tear-streaked, clutching a small child. They were huddled together on the leather seats, looking utterly terrified. For a moment, he thought it was an ambush, a bizarre and clumsy assassination attempt. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous, the sound of grinding stone. "What are you doing in my car?" The woman flinched but didn't scream. She held her child tighter, her body forming a shield. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "Please, just drive. Get us out of the city. That's all I ask." Alistair's mind raced through a dozen possibilities, each one ending in violence. His training, his entire life, had taught him to eliminate threats without hesitation. This woman and child were an unknown variable, a security breach of the highest order. They were a threat. But then he looked closer. He saw the faded bruise on her cheekbone, peeking out from under her hair. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, a fear that was not of him, but of something she had left behind. He saw the way she protected her daughter, an instinct so pure and powerful it momentarily silenced the cold logic in his head. "Get out of my car," he said, his voice hard. But it lacked the finality he intended. "I can't," she said, tears welling in her eyes again. "He'll find us. Please. I don't have any money, but I can work. I can do anything. Just take us somewhere safe." Her name was Alara. The child was Lily. She explained her story in clipped, halting sentences, her voice thick with shame and fear. She spoke of a man with a badge and a fist, of a life lived in the shadow of his rage. She did not beg or plead for pity. She stated the facts with a quiet dignity that was utterly at odds with her desperate situation. Alistair listened, his expression unreadable. He had seen the worst of humanity. He had dealt with killers, thieves, and traitors. But this was different. This was not the calculated violence of his world. This was the petty, cruel tyranny of a bully. It was pathetic, and it reminded him of something he had long since buried. He thought of his sister, Anna. He remembered her bright laugh, and he remembered the day it had been silenced forever by a man who claimed to love her, a man whose power had protected him from justice. The memory was a cold shard of ice in his chest. Against every instinct, against every rule he lived by, he put the car in drive and pulled smoothly out of the alley. He did not know where he was going. He only knew that he could not leave them there. For the first time in a decade, Alistair Volkov had made a decision that was not based on logic. It was based on the ghost of a memory and the sight of a desperate mother shielding her child from the storm. He was intrigued and more than a little confused by his own actions. This woman, with her quiet strength and her profound vulnerability, was a puzzle he couldn't immediately solve. He drove them through the rain-slicked streets, leaving the city's heart behind. He took them to a place he hadn't visited in years, a small, unassuming house nestled in a quiet, wooded area miles from the city limits. It was a safe house, one of a dozen he owned, but this one was different. This one had been his sister's. The house was clean but sterile, filled with furniture that was covered in white dust sheets. It had been preserved exactly as she had left it. Alistair had never had the strength to sell it, nor the courage to visit. Until now. "You will be safe here," he told Alara, his tone clipped and impersonal. He was already regretting his impulsiveness. He was exposing a weakness, a part of his past that no one knew existed. Alara looked around the quiet living room, her eyes wide. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude so profound it made him uncomfortable. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You cannot," he said flatly. "Do not try. There are supplies in the kitchen. The phone line is secure. Do not leave the house." He turned to go, eager to return to his world of cold certainties. "Wait," she called out. He stopped, his back to her. "You have a cut on your hand." He glanced down. A thin line of red bisected his knuckles, a minor injury from a meeting earlier that day that he hadn't even noticed. "It's nothing," he said dismissively. "It should be cleaned," she insisted. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a frightened victim, but the calm, competent tone of a nurse. Before he could protest, she had guided him to the kitchen, found an old first aid kit, and began to tend to the wound. Her touch was gentle and professional. Her fingers were deft as she cleaned the cut and applied a bandage. He found himself watching her, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. It was a simple, mundane act, but in his world, no one touched him unless they were paid to or trying to kill him. This quiet, selfless act of care was a foreign concept. "There," she said, finishing her work. "That should do it." She looked up at him, and for a moment, the fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a simple, human connection. Alistair pulled his hand back as if burned. "I have business to attend to," he muttered, and without another word, he left. But the feeling of her gentle touch lingered long after he was gone. Back in the city, Alistair put his formidable resources to work. He wanted to know everything about Marcus Thorne. The information came back quickly, and it was uglier than he had imagined. Thorne was not just an abuser. He was a corrupt officer, involved in extortion and evidence tampering. He was protected by a network of equally dirty cops. He was a cancer hiding behind a badge. The report confirmed what Alistair already knew in his gut. Alara was telling the truth. The knowledge settled in his chest, a cold, hard weight of anger. He hated men like Thorne, men who used their power to prey on the weak. They were a sloppy, dishonorable breed, a stark contrast to the cold, structured code of his own world. Over the next few days, Alistair found himself making excuses to return to the safe house. He told himself it was for security reasons, to ensure the location hadn't been compromised. But it was a lie. He was drawn back by something he couldn't name. Each time he arrived, the house felt a little less like a tomb and a little more like a home. Alara had removed the dust sheets. She cooked simple, fragrant meals, the smells of which filled the sterile air with a warmth it had not known in years. She moved through the house with a quiet grace, her presence a calming balm on the jagged edges of his soul. Lily, after her initial shyness, began to warm to him. She was a bright, curious child, her innocence a stark contrast to the cynicism of Alistair's world. She would follow him around the house, asking him endless questions with a child's unfiltered honesty. One afternoon, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, drawing with a set of colored pencils he had brought her on a whim. She was humming a small tune to herself, completely absorbed in her work. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She held up the piece of paper proudly. It was a child's simple rendering of 3 stick figures. A tall one with dark hair, a smaller one with a pink dress, and a tiny one with bright yellow hair. They were all holding hands under a smiling sun. "It's us," she said, pointing a small finger at each figure. "You, Mommy, and me. It's our new family." Alistair stared at the drawing. The word family struck him with the force of a physical blow. Family, to him, meant a legacy of blood and violence, a gilded cage of expectations. It meant his cold, demanding father and the ghost of his lost sister. It had never meant this. It had never meant a smiling son. He felt a crack appear in the icy wall around his heart. A small, almost imperceptible fracture, but it was there. He looked from the drawing to Lily's hopeful, innocent face, and he felt a protective instinct so fierce it startled him. He took the drawing from her small hand. "It's very good," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not identify. He folded the piece of paper carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, right next to his heart. That simple, childish drawing became his most treasured possession. It was a secret talisman, a reminder of a world he never knew existed, a world of simple kindness and unconditional acceptance, a world he was beginning to believe he might want to be a part of. But the outside world, his world, would not be kept at bay for long. Marcus Thorne was getting desperate. Cut off from his usual network, which was now wary of the attention he was drawing, he became reckless. He started using his police resources more openly, pulling traffic camera footage, tracking Alara's last known movements. Worse, he started talking. In the sordid bars where cops and criminals drank together, he bragged about his runaway wife and the powerful man he believed had taken her. The name Volkov began to be whispered in connection with a domestic dispute. Dmitri brought the news to Alistair, his face a careful mask of concern. "The council is growing nervous," he said, standing before Alistair's desk. "They say you're showing weakness, that this woman and child are a liability." Alistair's eyes turned to ice. "The council's opinion is noted," he said coldly. "This is more than opinion," Dmitri pressed, taking a dangerous step closer. "Rival factions are watching. They smell blood in the water. They see the ghost being distracted by a stray. They think you have gone soft." Dimitri's words were a direct challenge, a test of his authority. The old Alistair would have ended him for such insolence. But the new Alistair, the man with a child's drawing in his pocket, simply stared at him. "The woman is a distraction," Dmitri continued, emboldened by Alistair's silence. "Give her back to the cop. Let him have her. It will quiet the rumors and show everyone that business comes first. Always." The suggestion was logical. It was the smart move, the strategic play. It would solve a dozen problems at once, reaffirm his power, and put his enemies back on their heels. It was exactly what his father would have done. He thought of Alara's quiet courage. He thought of her gentle hands tending to his wound. He thought of Lily's drawing, of her innocent declaration of them as a family. He pictured handing them over to a man like Marcus Thorne. The thought made him physically ill. "Get out," Alistair said, his voice a low growl. Dmitri hesitated, surprised by the response. "Sir, I only mean to protect." "Get out." When Dmitri was gone, Alistair stood and walked to the window. He looked down at the city, at his empire of shadows. For years, he had protected it, nurtured it, made it invincible. But what was the point of a fortress if there was nothing precious inside it to protect? The choice was clear. It wasn't even a choice. He could not sacrifice them. He would not. He would sooner burn his entire kingdom to the ground. The crisis escalated faster than he could have anticipated. Thorne, in his desperation, leaked a falsified dossier to a rival family, pinning a recent high-profile crime on Alistair. It was a clever move, designed to force Alistair's hand and spark a war. At the same time, Dmitri, seeing his counsel rejected, began to subtly sow dissent within the ranks, portraying Alistair as a compromised leader. The pressure was immense. His organization was fracturing. His enemies were circling. His entire world was on the brink of collapse, all because he had let a woman and child into his car. He returned to the safe house late that night, the weight of his collapsing empire on his shoulders. He found Alara in the living room, packing a small bag. Her face was pale, her movements jerky and resolved. "I heard," she said, not looking at him. "I heard the news on the radio. The things they're saying about you. It's because of me." He didn't ask how she knew. It didn't matter. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Isn't it?" She finally looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I brought this to you. I never meant to. I'll leave. I'll take Lily, and I'll go. I can disappear. Thorne will come after me, and he'll leave you alone." She was offering him an escape. She was willing to walk back into the storm to save him from the rain she believed she had brought. It was the bravest, most selfless thing he had ever witnessed. "No," he said, the word a raw command. "You are not leaving. But your life, your world, it's all falling apart because of me." "Let it fall," he said, taking a step toward her. It was empty anyway. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, fragile hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't have the words to explain it. He couldn't articulate the profound shift that had occurred within him since she had stumbled into his life. He couldn't explain that her quiet integrity had become the moral compass he never knew he lacked. He couldn't tell her that her daughter's simple drawing was worth more to him than his entire criminal enterprise. Instead, he just looked at her and said, "Whatever happens, I need you to know something. You are a good person, Elara. You have a strength that people like me can only dream of." Her composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I always thought you were a good man," she whispered. "I saw it, right from the beginning. Even when you were trying so hard to hide it." Her faith in him was a staggering burden and an incredible gift. It was the final piece he needed. He knew what he had to do. It was not a move a king would make. It was not logical or strategic. It was the act of a man who had finally found something worth more than power. Alistair Volkov, the ghost, was about to become very, very visible. He spent the next 24 hours in a whirlwind of focused activity. He didn't fight the war Thorn and Dmitri wanted. He refused to play their game. Instead, he systematically dismantled his own secrecy, the very foundation of his power. He compiled a comprehensive file, every piece of evidence his people had gathered on Marcus Thorn's corruption, extortion rackets, witness intimidation, planted evidence, ties to organized crime. It was a career-ending, life-destroying collection of facts. Then he added something else. He included information on his own operations, carefully selected but undeniably incriminating details that corroborated the extent of the police corruption. He detailed the bribes, the lookouts, the information bought and sold. He was implicating himself, burning his own bridges to ensure Thorn had nowhere left to hide. He sent the entire package anonymously to the one journalist in the city known for her incorruptible integrity. He knew that by doing so, he was painting a massive target on his own back. The authorities, the rival families, his own council, they would all come for him. He was sacrificing his empire to save two people. It was a terrible business decision. It was the best decision he had ever made. The story broke the next morning. It was an explosion. The city's media went into a frenzy. Corruption in the ranks. An insider's ledger screamed the headlines. Marcus Thorn's face was plastered everywhere, his carefully constructed image of a hero cop shattered in an instant. An internal investigation was launched, the FBI was called in, and Thorn was arrested before lunchtime. The fallout was catastrophic, just as Alistair had predicted. His name was now linked to the scandal, his shadowy operations dragged into the harsh light of day. Warrants were issued. His assets were frozen. The council disavowed him, and Dmitri tried to stage a clumsy coup, which was quickly and brutally put down by the few men who remained loyal to Alistair not out of fear, but out of respect. His empire was in ruins. He was a king without a kingdom, a ghost exposed to the sun. He returned to the safe house for what he thought would be the last time. He was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, but he felt light. The immense weight of his father's legacy, of the name Volkov, had been lifted. He had lost everything, but he had saved them. Elara was waiting for him. She must have seen the news. She didn't say a word as he walked in. She simply went to the kitchen and made him a cup of tea, her movements calm and steady. She brought it to him where he stood in the middle of the living room, a man adrift. He took the cup, his hands trembling slightly. Their fingers brushed, a small spark of warmth in the cold wreckage of his life. They stood there in silence for a long time, the unspoken emotions hanging in the air between them. The storm had passed, and they were the only two people left on the shore. "What happens now?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "I don't know," he answered honestly. For the first time in his adult life, he had no plan, no strategy. He was completely untethered. The feeling should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. He looked at her clear, steady eyes, and he knew that he was not adrift. He was anchored. A year passed. It was a year of profound and difficult change. Alistair, with the help of a team of expensive lawyers, navigated the legal minefield he had created for himself. He cooperated, trading information on rival organizations and deeper police corruption in exchange for a plea deal. He lost the majority of his wealth and all of his illicit power. The ghost was officially dead. But Alistair Volkov was very much alive. He had salvaged enough of his legitimate assets to start over. And he was not starting over alone. He stood now in a brightly lit room filled with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. It was the opening day of the Anna Volkov Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to providing shelter and legal aid for victims of domestic abuse. It was named for his sister, a tribute he could finally make, not with blood money, but with something clean and hopeful. Alara was the director of the foundation. She stood at a small podium, speaking to a small crowd of supporters and journalists. She spoke with a quiet confidence that captivated the room. She was no longer a victim running from shadows. She was a beacon of strength for others. Alistair watched her from the back of the room, Lily holding his hand. He was not the man he had been a year ago. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple, comfortable clothes. The cold, calculating look in his eyes had been replaced by a warmth that was reflected in the small hand he held. He was no longer a king, but he felt richer than he ever had. Lily tugged on his hand. "Mommy looks pretty," she whispered. "Yes, she does," Alistair agreed, his voice filled with a quiet pride that was entirely new to him. Later that evening, the three of them were back at the house, no longer a sterile safe house, but a home. Lily's toys were scattered across the living room rug. Her drawings, dozens of them now, were taped to the refrigerator. The air smelled of the chocolate chip cookies Alara had baked that afternoon. Alistair was tucking Lily into bed. She was nearly asleep, her small body relaxed and safe. "Alistair," she murmured, her eyes fluttering open. "Yes, little one. I'm glad we hid in your car," she said, her voice drowsy with sleep. "Now we have a home." The simple, profound truth of her words settled deep in his soul. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Me too, Lily. Me too." He found Alara on the small porch, looking up at the star-filled sky. He came to stand beside her, the comfortable silence between them a language all its own. "She called this place home," he said quietly. He looked at Alara, at the woman who had crashed into his life and rearranged his entire universe. "She's right. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am home." Alara turned to him, her eyes soft in the moonlight. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of everything they had been through. It was a promise of everything that was to come. He looked down at her wrist. A faint, silvery line was still visible, a scar from her past, a reminder of the monster she had fled. It was a part of her story, a testament to her survival. He gently raised her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to the scar. It was not an act of pity, but one of reverence. He was honoring her strength, her resilience, her beautiful, unbreakable spirit. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they looked out at the quiet night. The city, his former kingdom, was a distant glow on the horizon. It no longer held any power over him. His world was right here, standing beside him. They had built a new life, a new family, one quiet day at a time. It was a kingdom of two, soon to be three, built not on fear or fortune, but on the enduring strength of kindness and the redemptive power of love. The ghost was gone, and in his place stood a man who was finally, truly, home.